Welcome, traveller, to Medieval Screen Finds, our quiet corner of the internet where we explore history, an adventurer's paradise, where we explore stories from our not-so-distant past. We invite you now to settle in, to find a comfortable space, and to let your mind drift gently back through the centuries. Tonight, our gaze will fall upon a figure shrouded in shadow, a person whose very existence occupied a peculiar, often terrifying place in the grand narrative of the past, the medieval executioner. Imagine, if you will, a time when justice was often swift, public, and undeniably brutal. A time when the boundaries between law and spectacle blurred, and the ultimate arbiter of a condemned soul's fate stood before a gathered crowd, wielding instruments of finality. This is not a tale of heroes or villains in the traditional sense, but rather an exploration of a profession that was both reviled and indispensable. We will peel back the layers of fear and superstition that clung to these individuals, not with the intention of shocking or disturbing, but to understand the quiet, often lonely rhythm of their lives. As the medieval sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, wavering shadows across cobbled streets, the executioner was often retreating to a life on the fringes, an existence dictated by the grim necessity of their trade. They were figures of paradox, powerful in their moments of duty, yet utterly isolated in their everyday lives. They embodied the stark realities of medieval justice, a silent mirror reflecting the harshness of an era. So let us dim the lights of your waking thoughts and allow the gentle current of history to carry you. We will navigate the intricate details of their world, the subtle nuances of their existence, and the profound impact they had, not just on those they dispatched, but on the very fabric of society itself. This journey is designed to be a calming one, a chance for your mind to wander through the echoes of the past, to find a tranquil rhythm in the telling of a story often misunderstood. Breathe deeply, softly, and allow the quiet whispers of centuries long past to guide you towards a restorative peace. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to Medieval Screen Finds to get more boring sleep videos, but only if these videos truly brings you rest. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's comforting seeing all the places where these calm historical stories reach. Imagine, if you will, the bustling marketplace of a medieval town. The scent of baking bread mixes with the earthy aroma of livestock and the distant, metallic tang of the blacksmith's forge. Voices rise and fall in a cacophony of commerce and chatter. But then, as your gaze drifts towards the edges of the town, perhaps near the outer walls, a different kind of quiet settles. There, in the periphery, you might spot a figure, or perhaps merely sense their presence, and an unspoken hush would fall over those nearby. This was often the reality for the medieval executioner, a person condemned to a role that society demanded yet deeply recoiled from. The hangman's burden was not merely the grim task of carrying out capital punishment. It was a profound social weight, a deeply ingrained stigma that permeated every aspect of their existence. In a society built on community, on familial ties, and on shared faith, the executioner was often an outcast, a necessary evil tolerated for the sake of order, yet simultaneously feared and shunned. It was a paradox that defined their lives, a constant struggle against the very societal norms they were employed to uphold. Consider the circumstances that might lead an individual into such a profession. It was rarely a choice born of ambition or desire. Far more often, the role was thrust upon them, a cruel twist of fate or the inescapable inheritance of a grim legacy. Imagine a son, perhaps, watching his father perform the horrific duties, knowing with a creeping dread that one day the axe, the rope, the gallows would become his own instruments. This hereditary aspect was not uncommon, a family condemned across generations to fulfill society's most unpleasant demands. If not inherited, the position might be forced upon a condemned criminal, offered as a brutal alternative to their own demise. Life in a medieval prison was often short and brutal, a slow decay of the body and spirit. The offer of life, even one stained with the blood of others, would have been a powerful, albeit terrible, incentive. Imagine the internal struggle, the desperate choice between certain death and a life of profound isolation and infamy. The individual was, in essence, condemned to the role, their future irrevocably shaped by circumstances beyond their control. Towns, large and small, grappled with the same fundamental problem: the need for justice, for order, for the visible enforcement of laws. Crime, from petty theft to violent murder, was a constant threat, and the spectacle of punishment was deemed essential to deter others. But who would carry out these grim duties? Who would wield the sword, manage the gallows, or prepare the instruments of torture? Few, if any, volunteered for such a life. The burden of the hangman was precisely this: to perform a vital function for society while simultaneously being ostracized by that very society. It was a role no one wanted, yet every community required. This necessity created a strange, uncomfortable dance between the executioner and the town, a silent agreement to endure a mutual discomfort for the sake of societal cohesion. The social stigma surrounding the executioner was pervasive and deeply ingrained. They were often forced to live on the edge of society, sometimes quite literally outside the city walls, in isolated dwellings. This physical separation mirrored their social ostracization. Imagine walking through the crowded streets, the sounds of laughter and conversation filling the air, and then observing a sudden, subtle shift in the atmosphere as the executioner passed by. Conversations would falter, eyes would avoid theirs, and a palpable sense of unease would ripple through the crowd. This was not always overt hostility, but rather a quiet, pervasive avoidance. No one wanted to share a meal with them, to shake their hand, or to allow their children to play nearby. The stain of their profession was believed to be contagious, a spiritual and moral contamination that few dared to risk. Even the simple act of purchasing goods in the market might be fraught with tension, as merchants might reluctantly serve them, hurrying the transaction to avoid prolonged contact. Yet within this shadow of ostracization, there lay a fascinating duality, a hidden identity that few openly acknowledged. While feared for their grim duties, executioners were also secretly relied upon for more than just justice. This reliance stemmed in part from their intimate knowledge of the human body, gained through their macabre work. Imagine, for a moment, the skills they developed, a profound understanding of anatomy, of musculature, of the precise points of vulnerability. This knowledge, though acquired through gruesome means, often translated into an unexpected proficiency in other fields. Many executioners, surprisingly, doubled as healers or surgeons. In a time when medical knowledge was rudimentary and formal training scarce, the executioner's practical, albeit brutal, experience provided them with a unique and valuable skill set. They might be called upon to set broken bones, to extract teeth, or even to perform rudimentary surgeries. Imagine the whispered requests, the furtive visits in the dead of night, as desperate villagers sought their medical expertise, overriding their ingrained fear in the face of suffering. This dual identity, feared for their public role, yet secretly sought after for their healing abilities, highlights the complex and often contradictory nature of their place in medieval society. They were the bringers of death, yes, but sometimes they were also the reluctant dispensers of life. The concept of justice in the medieval period was far removed from our modern understanding. It was often less about rehabilitation and more about retribution and public spectacle. The executioner was the central figure in this theatrical display of power and punishment. They were the visible hand of the law, the one who transformed abstract decrees into tangible, horrifying realities. Imagine the hushed anticipation in the crowd as the condemned was led to the scaffold, the air thick with tension and the morbid curiosity of the onlookers. The executioner, often masked or hooded, stood as a silent, imposing figure, a symbol of the ultimate authority of the ruling powers. Their presence was a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the unyielding grip of the law. The executioner's home, often set apart from the main community, became a place of both refuge and further isolation. Imagine the quiet evenings within those walls, far from the whispers and averted gazes of the townspeople. What were their thoughts? What were their dreams? Did the day's grim work haunt their sleep, or did they develop a hardened stoicism, a necessary emotional detachment to survive their profession? Perhaps they found solace in the mundane rhythms of daily life, tending a small garden, mending clothes, or simply sitting in silence. Their families, too, bore the weight of the stigma. Children of executioners might find themselves shunned at school, excluded from games, and struggling to forge friendships. Marriage outside of other executioner families was often impossible, leading to a strange, insular kinship network among those who shared this unenviable profession. The burden, it seems, extended far beyond the individual, reaching out to touch the lives of all connected to them. Even their income, which could sometimes be substantial, came with a heavy social cost. Some towns paid their executioners handsomely, recognizing the unpleasantness of the task and the willingness of few to undertake it. They might even be provided with a house, tax relief, or other perks to entice them to remain. But these financial benefits could never truly compensate for the profound social isolation they endured. Imagine having coin in your purse, perhaps more than many honest tradesmen, yet knowing that the very act of earning it rendered you an untouchable. This financial independence, while practical, only served to highlight their otherness, to reinforce the invisible barrier that separated them from the rest of society. The perks were not a sign of respect, but rather a tacit acknowledgement of the deep social cost of their unique and unwelcome employment. The hangman's burden was, therefore, a multifaceted weight. The moral implications of taking a life, the physical demands of their gruesome craft, and the crushing weight of societal condemnation. They existed in a liminal space, essential yet reviled, powerful yet powerless against the pervasive fear and disgust they inspired. They were the enforcers of justice, yet often victims of a social injustice all their own. Their lives were a constant, quiet struggle against the invisible chains of their profession, a silent testament to the harsh realities of medieval existence. Consider the psychological toll this must have taken. Imagine the quiet moments before an execution, the weight of a human life resting in their hands. While the tone remained detached and factual, the very act of performing such a duty must have left an indelible mark. Did they develop rituals to cope? Perhaps a hardened exterior, a professional demeanor that masked any internal turmoil. The medieval world was one where death was a more constant companion, a more visible part of daily life. But even within that context, the role of the executioner was unique in its direct engagement with the ultimate finality. They were the instrument, the catalyst, in the public extinguishing of a human flame. This deep-seated societal aversion also manifested in subtle ways. Even the tools of their trade became imbued with a dark aura. The gallows, standing stark against the sky, was not merely a wooden structure, but a symbol of dread, a place where lives ended in public spectacle. The axe, honed to a razor's edge, was not simply a tool, but an extension of the executioner's fearsome power. These objects, associated intimately with the hangman's burden, were avoided and perhaps even whispered about in hushed tones, carrying the lingering echo of past grim duties. The executioner's unique position, balanced precariously between necessity and revulsion, forced them to develop a remarkable resilience. They had to navigate a world that simultaneously depended on them and despised them. This required a certain kind of inner fortitude, a detachment that allowed them to perform their duties without succumbing to the overwhelming emotional weight. They were, in a very real sense, professionals in the art of death, and like any skilled professional, they developed methods, routines, and a certain stoicism to ensure the grim tasks were completed with a chilling efficiency. Ultimately, the first chapter of our quiet historical journey reveals a figure defined by paradox. The medieval executioner was a person upon whom a terrible burden was placed, a job no one wanted, yet a job that society could not do without. Their lives were a testament to the harsh realities of medieval justice, lived out on the margins, perpetually in the shadow of their grim profession. As we gently transition to the next aspect of their world, hold in your mind this image of a solitary figure, bound by duty, separated by stigma, yet undeniably vital to the intricate, often brutal tapestry of the medieval age. The quiet hum of their isolated existence continues, as we now turn our attention to the very instruments they wielded, the tools that defined their terrifying craft. As we gently continue our journey into the quiet, often unsettling world of the medieval executioner, our focus now shifts to the tangible realities of their grim profession, the instruments themselves. Imagine the subtle clink of metal, the coarse feel of hemp rope, the dull gleam of polished wood. These were not merely objects, but extensions of justice, tools imbued with a chilling purpose. The medieval executioner's trade was a craft, albeit a macabre one, requiring specific implements, each suited to a different form of punishment, and each deployed within the intricate tapestry of medieval ritual. The range of the executioner's tools was as varied as the perceived transgressions of the age. Primarily, one thinks of the sword, the axe, the gallows, and the breaking wheel. Each of these instruments carried its own grim significance, a distinct method of ending a life that reflected the crime, the status of the condemned, and the prevailing legal customs of the region. The sword, for instance, was often reserved for nobles or those of higher standing. It was considered a more honorable and swift death, a sharp, clean cut that minimized prolonged suffering. Imagine the weighty balance of such a blade in the executioner's hands, the cold precision required to deliver a single, decisive blow. The axe, perhaps more iconic, was a brutal, pragmatic tool, used primarily for beheading commoners. Its heavy blade, designed for cleaving, demanded immense strength and a steady hand. The gallows, a stark silhouette against the sky, was the most common instrument for public hangings, a method of execution meant to be a terrifying deterrent. And then there was the breaking wheel, an instrument of agonizing, prolonged suffering, reserved for the most heinous of crimes, a truly horrific mechanism designed to slowly crush and mangle the body. Each tool, in its unique way, spoke to the medieval understanding of justice and retribution, transforming the abstract concept of punishment into a chillingly physical reality. The preparation for an execution was often as significant as the act itself, steeped in ceremony and public display. Executions in the medieval era were rarely private affairs. They were highly public spectacles intended as stark warnings to the populace. Imagine the days leading up to such an event, the whispers spreading through the town, the scaffolding being erected in the marketplace or on a designated execution ground, the gathering of curious onlookers. The executioner would meticulously prepare their tools, sharpening the axe or sword, ensuring the gallows were structurally sound, or inspecting the ropes. This was not merely about practical readiness, but also about the solemnity of the occasion. The instruments, once simply wood and metal, became charged with symbolic meaning, representing the ultimate authority of the state and the finality of justice. The procession of the condemned to the execution site was a ritual in itself. Imagine the solemn parade, often accompanied by priests offering final rites and perhaps a guard of soldiers. The route would be lined with spectators, their faces a mixture of fear, morbid curiosity, and perhaps even pity. The executioner would often be present, a silent, imposing figure, perhaps leading the way or waiting at the scaffold. This entire ceremony was designed to impress upon the witnesses the severity of the law and the dreadful consequences of transgression. It was a macabre piece of theatre, played out on the stage of the public square, with the executioner as its grim protagonist. Within this solemn ceremony, the art of a clean death was a testament to the executioner's skill. While the goal of many executions was to inflict public suffering as a deterrent, a skilled executioner aimed for a quick, merciful end where possible. This was not out of compassion for the condemned, necessarily, but more often out of professional pride and a desire to avoid a botched, agonizing spectacle that could incite unrest or simply reflect poorly on the executioner's abilities. Imagine the pressure. A single swift blow of the axe or sword required immense precision and strength. A miscalculation could lead to a horrific, prolonged death, an outcome that no one desired. For hangings, the knot had to be expertly tied, the drop precisely calculated to ensure a swift breaking of the neck, rather than a slow, torturous strangulation. This mastery of their tools, this chilling art, distinguished a competent executioner from a clumsy one. While not always successful, the intention for a quick end was often present, a subtle acknowledgement of the inherent solemnity of ending a life. The attire of the executioner also varied widely by region and ritual, sometimes adding to their mystique, sometimes further emphasizing their isolation. Imagine the stark image of a black hood, concealing the face, rendering the executioner anonymous and embodying the impersonal nature of justice. This anonymity could serve multiple purposes, protecting the executioner from personal reprisal, enhancing their ominous aura, or simply allowing them to carry out their grim duties without revealing their identity to the fearful crowds. In other regions, they might wear a simple leather apron, practical for their messy work, yet still serving as a clear identifier of their profession. Sometimes the executioner would work barefaced, their identity known, perhaps even feared, by the local populace. The choice of attire was often dictated by local custom, by the specific requirements of the punishment, or by the degree to which the executioner was integrated, or more commonly, isolated, within the community. These sartorial choices were not merely functional, they were symbolic, contributing to the overall ritual and reinforcing the executioner's unique, often terrifying role. Let us delve deeper into the specific tools, allowing their presence to settle quietly in your mind. The sword, as mentioned, was the instrument of choice for executions by decapitation, particularly for the nobility and those accorded a degree of respect in death. Imagine the weight of a broadsword, its polished steel reflecting the grim light of a medieval morning. The executioner would have maintained it meticulously, keeping the edge razor sharp. The technique involved a single, powerful stroke, aimed at the neck, severing the head cleanly from the body. This method was considered swift and honorable, a privilege denied to common criminals who often faced the more ignominious death by hanging or the brutal torment of the wheel. The very act of wielding the sword for such a purpose set the executioner apart, transforming a weapon of war into an instrument of ultimate justice. The cold steel in their hands became the arbiter of a soul's final departure from this earthly realm. The axe, a heavier, more brutal tool, was widely used for beheading commoners and criminals. Imagine the sheer force required to wield such an instrument effectively. Unlike the sword, which relied on precise cutting, the axe depended on raw power and a downward cleaving motion. The executioner would often position the condemned's head on a block, ensuring stability for the fatal blow. A poorly executed strike could lead to multiple, agonizing blows, a horrifying spectacle for both the condemned and the onlookers. This made the skill of the executioner paramount. They had to be strong, steady, and utterly focused, their grim resolve unwavering. The sound of the axe hitting the block, a dull, thudding finality, would reverberate through the gathered crowd. A chilling sound that spoke of irreversible judgment. The gallows, perhaps the most universally recognized symbol of medieval execution, stood tall and ominous, often erected in a prominent public space as a constant reminder of the law's reach. Imagine the rough-hewn timber, creaking in the wind, a permanent fixture in many towns. Hangings were a common form of execution for a wide range of crimes, from theft to murder. The executioner's role here was not merely to pull a lever. It involved careful preparation, ensuring the rope was strong and properly knotted, judging the height of the drop to ensure a quick breaking of the neck rather than a slow, agonizing strangulation, and managing the condemned in their final moments. The public nature of these events meant that the executioner performed their grim duty before hundreds, sometimes thousands of eyes, under immense scrutiny. The sight of a body swaying from the gallows, left exposed for days as a stark warning, was a common, if horrifying, part of the medieval landscape. And then there was the breaking wheel, an instrument of truly terrifying cruelty, reserved for the most heinous offences such as regicide, parricide, or particularly brutal murders. Imagine a large wooden wheel, sometimes with spokes, upon which the condemned would be bound. The executioner would then systematically break the bones of the victim with a heavy bludgeon, limb by limb, often over a prolonged period. This was not about swift death, but about maximum suffering, a public display of the ultimate retribution. The sounds of this punishment, the cries of agony, would have been truly horrifying, designed to instill profound terror in the onlookers. The executioner, in this instance, became an instrument of protracted torment, their role shifting from swift arbiter of death to slow conductor of agony. This grim duty showcases the extreme end of medieval justice and the chilling versatility of the executioner's tools. Beyond these primary instruments, the executioner's toolkit might also include various implements for torture. While distinct from execution, torture was often a preliminary step, used to extract confessions or information, or simply as a form of punishment itself. The rack, the thumbscrews, branding irons, and various devices for mutilation were all within the purview of the executioner. Imagine the creaking of the rack, the slow, agonizing stretch of limbs, the sizzle of hot iron on flesh. These tools, like their execution counterparts, were not just objects. They were instruments of control, of pain, and of the raw power wielded by the state. The executioner in such instances had to possess not only physical strength, but also a chilling detachment, a capacity to inflict unimaginable suffering while maintaining a calm, professional demeanor. The rituals surrounding the use of these tools were often deeply symbolic. The execution ground itself was a sacred and profane space, a place where earthly justice met eternal judgment. The presence of priests, the reading of sentences, the final prayers, all contributed to the solemnity and the theological justification of the act. The executioner, by meticulously performing their role within these rituals, became an integral part of the medieval worldview. a necessary bridge between the earthly realm of law and the divine realm of ultimate justice. Consider the psychological impact of working with these tools day in and day out. The constant proximity to death, the handling of implements designed solely for ending life, must have shaped the executioner in profound ways. Did they view their tools as mere instruments, extensions of their professional duty? Or did they become imbued with a darker, more personal significance? Perhaps they developed a respect for the sharpness of the blade, the strength of the rope, the efficiency of the wheel, seeing them as essential components of their macabre craft. The very act of cleaning and maintaining these instruments would have been a ritual in itself, a silent acknowledgement of the power they held. The historical accounts, though often sparse and fragmented, paint a picture of individuals deeply entrenched in the material reality of their profession. They understood the nuances of wood and metal, the precise physics of a drop, the anatomy of a neck. Their knowledge was practical, brutal, and utterly essential for carrying out their duties. This practical expertise, born of repeated grim experience, gave them a unique, if terrifying, form of authority. When they appeared with their chosen instrument, there was no doubt about the grim purpose for which they had come. The soundscape of an execution would have been stark and memorable. The murmur of the crowd, the final words of the condemned, the sharp command, and then the chilling sound of the axe hitting the block, the creak of the gallows, or the muffled thud of the bludgeon against bone. These sounds, imprinted on the memory of the onlookers, served as a powerful auditory deterrent, a grim echo of justice carried out. The executioner, often silent throughout, was the orchestrator of this grim symphony, their movements precise, their actions deliberate. As the sun would set on an execution day, the tools would be put away, cleaned and stored, ready for their next grim deployment. The gallows would stand empty, a silent sentinel, until the next condemned prisoner was brought before it. The axe and sword would be sheathed, their edges waiting patiently for the next call to duty. The breaking wheel, perhaps, would be dismantled, its horrific memory lingering in the air. These were the tools of a trade that no one truly desired, but a trade that medieval society deemed utterly necessary for its very functioning. This examination of the executioner's tools and the rituals surrounding them offers a quieter, more detailed understanding of their grim craft. It moves beyond the generalized image of a hangman to reveal the specific instruments of their power and the meticulous, if unsettling, preparation required. As we gently draw this chapter to a close, allow the images of these stark instruments to recede and prepare to drift into the quieter, more personal aspects of the executioner's life when not performing their terrifying duties. We now turn our attention to the moments between the spectacles, to the rhythms of their daily existence in the shadow of their grim profession. As the last echoes of the public spectacle faded and the crowd slowly dispersed from the gallows or the execution square, the medieval executioner would often retreat, not to a life of leisure, but to a quieter, yet still profoundly isolated existence. Imagine the shift in atmosphere, from the intense charged energy of the public duty to the mundane, often lonely rhythms of everyday life. This chapter invites you to drift into the silent spaces between the grim duties, to explore how these figures, burdened by their profession, sustained themselves and navigated the constant societal currents of fear and avoidance. Their lives were a complex tapestry of isolation and ingenuity, a testament to survival on the fringes of a world that both needed and reviled them. It might surprise you to learn that the executioner's duties often extended far beyond the solemn act of carrying out capital punishment. Their grim profession granted them a unique, albeit unsettling skill set and a position that, while scorned, made them useful in other, often equally unpleasant municipal tasks. Executioners frequently worked as torturers, a role intimately linked to the judicial process of the time. Imagine the dark, echoing chambers beneath the castle or town hall, where the executioner, with a chilling calmness, would employ various instruments to extract confessions or information from accused criminals. The psychological and physical demands of such a role would have been immense, requiring a profound detachment from the suffering they inflicted. This aspect of their work further cemented their image as figures of fear and pain, deepening the societal chasm between them and the common folk. Beyond the judicial sphere, executioners often served as knackers, responsible for the disposal of animal carcasses. In medieval towns, with their close proximity to livestock and rudimentary sanitation, the quick and efficient removal of dead animals was crucial to public health. Imagine the unsavory task, the hauling of diseased cattle, the disposal of expired working beasts, the careful rendering of materials that could be salvaged, such as hides or fat. This work, while essential, was considered deeply unpleasant and further associated the executioner with filth, decay, and the less palatable aspects of life and death. Their involvement in such tasks reinforced their image as handlers of the impure, solidifying their status as societal outcasts. Furthermore, some executioners were also employed as street cleaners, particularly in larger towns. Imagine the narrow, winding streets, often filled with refuse, animal waste, and the general detritus of daily life. The executioner, perhaps clad in a practical, unadorned garment, would move through these thoroughfares, diligently clearing away the accumulated grime. This role, while seemingly menial, was vital for maintaining a semblance of order and hygiene in urban environments. It placed them in close proximity to the very people who shunned them, yet it also highlighted their continued usefulness in the most basic, often thankless, civic duties. These additional tasks, from torturer to knacker to street cleaner, illustrate the multifaceted nature of the executioner's burden, underscoring their unique and often undesirable position within the medieval labor force. They were, in essence, the municipal employees for all tasks too grim, too dirty, or too taboo for anyone else. Perhaps one of the most intriguing aspects of the executioner's life between executions was their unexpected role in medieval medicine. Due to their grim work, many executioners possessed an intimate and practical knowledge of anatomy. Imagine the detailed understanding of bones, muscles, and organs they would have gained through repeated exposure to the human body in various states. This knowledge, though acquired through horrific means, often translated into valuable medical skills. Many executioners doubled as healers or surgeons, especially in times when formal medical training was scarce and often rudimentary. They might be called upon to set broken bones, perform amputations, or even extract teeth. Imagine a desperate villager, perhaps with a festering wound or a compound fracture, reluctantly seeking the aid of the very man who might one day dispatch them. These consultations would have been discreet, often conducted under the cloak of darkness, driven by necessity rather than choice. The paradoxical nature of the executioner as both bringer of death and reluctant healer highlights the desperate conditions of medieval medicine and the practical, albeit unsettling, resourcefulness of these individuals. Their hands, accustomed to wielding the axe, were also capable of binding a wound, a stark testament to the strange intersection of their grim profession and the urgent needs of the community. Despite their undeniable usefulness in these various capacities, the pervasive stain of blood clung to the executioner and their family. The social ostracism was profound and deeply ingrained, a constant undercurrent in their daily lives. Imagine the simple gestures of human connection that were denied to them, Few would willingly share food with an executioner, as if their touch might contaminate the meal. Shaking hands, a common greeting and a sign of camaraderie, was largely avoided. This aversion went beyond mere discomfort. It was rooted in deep-seated superstitions and the belief that the executioner's profession rendered them ritually impure. They were, in essence, tainted by their association with death and violence. The implications for marriage and family life were particularly devastating. Marrying into an executioner's family was almost unthinkable for those outside the profession. This meant that executioner families often had to marry only among themselves, creating a closed, insular community defined by their shared, dreaded profession. Imagine the limited prospects for their children, the crushing weight of a family name that carried such a heavy stigma. This enforced endogamy perpetuated the isolation across generations, cementing their status as a distinct, outcast group within society. The simple desire for companionship, for a loving partner, was profoundly complicated, if not entirely thwarted, by the inherited stain of their grim livelihood. Yet, amidst this profound social cost, there was the undeniable reality of payment and perks. Some towns, recognizing the vital yet unpleasant nature of the executioner's role, paid handsomely for their services. Imagine the negotiations, a grim contract exchanging a livelihood for a life of social alienation. The wages could be substantial, reflecting the scarcity of willing candidates and the importance of their function. Beyond a regular salary, some executioners were granted additional benefits, such as a designated home, often located on the outskirts of town or even outside the city walls, reinforcing their physical and social separation, but at least providing a stable dwelling. Tax relief was another perk, easing their financial burden. In some instances, they might even receive a portion of the condemned's confiscated property or the clothes of the executed, adding to their income through unsavory means. These financial incentives, while practical, could never truly offset the profound social isolation they endured. Imagine having more money than many of your neighbors, yet being unable to share a simple drink in the tavern or send your children to the village school without them being cruelly shunned. The payment, in a way, was compensation not just for their grim duties, but for the life of profound loneliness and societal rejection that came with the job. The daily routine of an executioner, when not engaged in public duties, would have been a stark contrast to the dramatic public spectacles. Imagine the quiet mornings, perhaps tending a small garden, a stark contrast to the grim work of disposing of animal carcasses. They might mend their own clothes, cook their own simple meals, performing the same mundane tasks as any other medieval citizen, yet always under the shadow of their profession. Their interactions with others would have been minimal, often transactional and hurried. Shopkeepers might serve them reluctantly, conversation would be clipped, and eye contact avoided. This constant, subtle rejection would have fostered a deep sense of self-reliance, perhaps even a quiet stoicism. Their dwellings, often isolated, became their sanctuaries. Imagine a small, humble cottage, perhaps with a high fence or a thick hedge, providing a physical barrier against the curious and fearful gazes of the outside world. Within these walls, they might find a rare moment of peace away from the judgmental eyes. What did they do in these private moments? Did they read? If literate, did they practice a quiet craft? Did they simply sit in silence, contemplating the quiet rhythm of their lives, perhaps reflecting on the grim necessities of their trade? This private sphere, however small, was essential for their mental and emotional survival in a society that offered them little comfort. The unique knowledge of the executioner also extended to matters of death and the afterlife, which, in a deeply religious age, gave them a peculiar, if unacknowledged, spiritual significance. They were the last human interaction for the condemned, the final earthly hand before a soul was, hopefully, released to its divine judgment. While they were instruments of earthly justice, they also touched upon the sacred. This added another layer of complexity to their identity, a subtle, unspoken power that further contributed to the awe and fear they inspired. In some larger towns, executioners might have even had assistants or apprentices, often drawn from their own families or from the ranks of those with no other prospects. Imagine the training, the passing down of gruesome skills from one generation to the next, a silent, macabre apprenticeship. This further reinforced the insular nature of their profession, creating small, almost hereditary guilds of death dealers. The knowledge of anatomy, of poisons. Some executioners were also involved in the preparation of lethal substances. Of the various instruments, all would have been carefully transmitted, ensuring the continuation of their essential, albeit reviled, service. The paradox of their existence was a constant theme. They were isolated from society, yet entirely dependent on it for their livelihood. They performed tasks that were vital for public health and order, yet were considered ritually unclean. They possessed unique skills, sometimes even saving lives, yet were primarily known for ending them. This constant push and pull, this unwavering tension between their necessity and their revulsion, shaped every aspect of their life between executions. It was a quiet struggle, a persistent reminder of their inescapable burden. As this chapter gently concludes, allow your mind to absorb the silent strength and quiet endurance of these figures. Their daily lives, far from the dramatic public stage, were a testament to human adaptation in the face of profound social alienation. The subtle hum of their isolated existence, the mundane tasks that filled their days, and the unique skills they wielded, all paint a more nuanced picture than the simple image of a hangman. We now prepare to shift our focus back to the public sphere, to the moments when the executioner stepped into the harsh light of day and justice became a solemn and often brutal public spectacle. Let us drift now towards the ritual of death and the grim theatre that unfolded in the heart of medieval communities. As the hushed silence of the executioner's private world recedes, our journey now brings us back into the bustling, yet often grim, heart of medieval society, the public square. Imagine the vibrant tapestry of daily life in a medieval town. The cacophony of vendors, the chatter of townsfolk, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Yet, on certain designated days, this lively tableau would transform into a solemn, almost sacred space. Our focus now turns to the chilling reality of medieval executions as public theatre, communal spectacles steeped in ritual and symbolism, designed not merely to punish, but to instruct, to warn, and to instill a profound sense of awe and fear. A morbid spectacle it truly was, drawing crowds from all corners of the town, and often from surrounding villages. Imagine the anticipation building in the days leading up to such an event, the whispers of the condemned's name, the details of their crime spreading through the populace. The execution ground, whether a permanent gallows or a specially erected scaffold in the marketplace, would become the focal point of all attention. People would gather for hours, jostling for a better view, their faces a complex mixture of morbid curiosity, genuine fear, and a strange sense of civic duty. This was not merely entertainment in the modern sense. It was a deeply ingrained aspect of medieval life, a visible manifestation of justice being meted out. The crowds gathered for executions, which were seen as both punishment and moral lesson. It was a powerful, if brutal, demonstration of the governing authority's power, a chilling tableau designed to reinforce societal norms and to deter potential wrongdoers. The condemned prisoner, in their final moments, often became the reluctant star of this grim performance. Their journey from prison to the execution site was often a public procession, a final walk of shame and repentance. Imagine the solemn escort, perhaps a priest offering last rites, as the condemned made their way through the throng of onlookers. At the scaffold, before the final act, the condemned was often afforded the opportunity for final words. These could take many forms: a heartfelt confession, an admission of guilt, a desperate plea for divine mercy, or even occasionally a defiant speech. Imagine the hushed attention of the crowd, straining to catch every word, every whisper. These final pronouncements were considered deeply significant. A good confession was believed to aid the soul's passage into the afterlife and could serve as a powerful moral lesson for the assembled spectators. It was a chance for the condemned to acknowledge their wrongdoing, to articulate their repentance, or, in rare cases, to assert their innocence one last time. This ritual of final words added a layer of dramatic intensity to the spectacle, transforming the condemned into a central character in this morbid play. The executioner's role in this public theatre was paradoxical. While central to the entire performance, they were often a figure of silence, precision, and chilling calmness. Imagine them moving with deliberate, unhurried steps, their movements economical and purposeful. Their presence was imposing, often masked or hooded, adding to their mysterious and terrifying aura. They were the visible hand of justice, the one who transformed the abstract sentence into a tangible, horrifying reality. Yet, despite their central role, they rarely spoke, allowing the rituals, the pronouncements of the law, and the final words of the condemned to dominate the auditory landscape. Their actions spoke louder than any words, their calm and precise movements conveying an unyielding resolve. They were the orchestrator of the final act, ensuring that the grim ceremony unfolded according to the prescribed customs, a silent, yet utterly pivotal figure in the ritual of death. The unpredictable nature of some executions also added a strange element of morbid suspense to the public theatre. While the goal was often a swift, efficient death, there were instances of both unexpected mercy and agonizing misery. Imagine the sudden ripple of surprise through the crowd if a last-minute pardon was dramatically announced, a rare act of clemency that would transform the atmosphere from dread to astonishment. Such events, though infrequent, serve to highlight the absolute power of the ruling authority, capable of both ultimate punishment and surprising grace. Conversely, a botched execution, where the axe missed its mark or the rope failed to deliver a quick death, would plunge the crowd into a collective gasp of horror and prolonged agony. Imagine the screams of the condemned, the grim struggles, and the palpable discomfort of the onlookers. These horrifying failures underscored the brutal realities of the time and the immense pressure on the executioner to perform their duties flawlessly. Such instances, though disturbing, were also part of the public lesson, reinforcing the idea that justice, even in its execution, could be unpredictable and profoundly unforgiving. Let us explore further the theatrical elements of these public spectacles. The very staging of an execution was carefully considered. The scaffold would be elevated, ensuring visibility for the largest possible crowd. Imagine the wooden platform, perhaps draped in black cloth, standing starkly against the medieval sky. Around it, guards would maintain order, keeping the eager or fearful crowds at bay. The atmosphere was a strange mix of carnival and solemn religious ceremony. Vendors might sell food and drink, creating a festive air on the periphery, even as the central event unfolded in grim earnest. This juxtaposition of mundane commerce and profound death was a peculiar characteristic of medieval public life. The symbolism embedded in these events was profound. The act of public execution was a visible affirmation of the social hierarchy and the absolute power of the monarch or local lord. It demonstrated that even the most powerful could be brought low by the law, and that transgression would be met with severe retribution. The body of the condemned, once executed, often remained on display for a period, a gruesome effigy serving as a lasting warning. Imagine the decaying remains, picked at by birds, a stark and constant reminder to all who pass by of the consequences of defying authority. This served as a chilling, non-verbal extension of the moral lesson. Beyond the immediate spectacle, the executioner's actions also contributed to the ongoing narrative of justice. Their calm demeanour, their precise movements, and their unwavering resolve were all part of the unspoken message. They embodied the impartial hand of the law, devoid of personal malice, simply carrying out the dictates of authority. This professional detachment, while essential for their own psychological survival, also served to legitimize the violence they inflicted. It was not personal. It was justice. The crowd itself was an active participant in this public theatre. Their reactions, their murmurs, their gasps, and even their cheers all contributed to the unfolding drama. Imagine the collective sigh of relief when a death was quick, or the shared horror when it was prolonged. Sometimes the crowd might even react with anger if they felt the executioner was clumsy or deliberately cruel, highlighting the fine line the executioner walked between their duty and the expectations of the populace. This collective emotional response amplified the impact of the spectacle, ensuring that the moral lesson resonated deeply within the community. Religious elements were often interwoven into the fabric of the public execution. Priests would offer prayers for the condemned soul, and the condemned themselves might be encouraged to make a final confession and prayer. This brought a spiritual dimension to the proceedings, reminding everyone that while earthly justice was being served, eternal judgment awaited. The executioner, though carrying out a secular role, was operating within a deeply religious framework, and their actions were often seen as a necessary, if terrible, step in the journey of a soul from this world to the next. Consider the role of specific forms of execution in this public theatre. Hanging, as the most common method, was particularly emblematic of public shaming. The sight of a body dangling from the gallows, twisting in the wind, was a powerful image of dishonour and finality. Beheading, while considered more honourable, was equally public and dramatic, with the swift fall of the blade and the immediate separation of head from body marking an undeniable end. The more brutal forms, like drawing and quartering, or the breaking wheel, were designed for maximum public impact, their prolonged agony intended to instill absolute terror and underscore the severity of the crime. Each method, chosen to fit the severity of the offence, had its own grim choreography, its own set of visual and auditory cues that contributed to the overall theatrical experience. The executioner's preparation of the site, often including the laying out of tools in a visible manner, was also part of the subtle performance. Imagine the gleaming axe or the sturdy rope laid out carefully on a clean cloth near the scaffold. These visible preparations signaled the impending action, building tension and focusing the crowd's attention on the instruments of their grim purpose. This meticulousness, even in such a brutal setting, highlighted the professional nature of their craft. The echoes of these public spectacles lingered long after the crowds dispersed. The gallows would remain, a silent monument to power and justice. The stories of the condemned and their final moments would be retold, often embellished, contributing to the local lore and serving as cautionary tales for generations. The executioner, having performed their grim duty, would retreat once more into their isolated life, but their image, seared into the collective consciousness of the town, would remain a powerful symbol of the brutal realities of medieval justice. As this chapter quietly draws to a close, allow the images of these public rituals to settle gently in your mind. The morbid curiosity, the solemnity, the stark reality of life and death played out on a public stage. All were integral to the medieval understanding of law and order. The executioner, a silent figure at the heart of this grim theatre, moved with a chilling precision, an indispensable part of a system that demanded both punishment and public display. We now prepare to delve into the lasting consequences of this profession, not just for the individual executioner, but for their entire lineage. Let us drift towards the profound implications of stigma and inheritance, exploring how the hangman's burden was passed down through generations. As the hushed whispers of public spectacle fade into the quiet murmur of history, our journey now turns inwards, focusing on the profound and often heartbreaking legacy that clung to the medieval executioner, not just as an individual, but as a member of a marked bloodline. Imagine the invisible chains that bound a family, forged not of iron, but of societal fear and inherited duty. This chapter invites you to drift into the quiet, persistent echoes of the past, exploring how the hangman's burden was passed down through generations, shaping lives, limiting choices, and cementing a unique, often tragic place within the intricate tapestry of medieval society. The concept of a family profession was common in the Middle Ages. Trades like blacksmithing, weaving, or baking were often passed from father to son, ensuring skills were preserved and livelihoods maintained. However, for the executioner, this familial inheritance took on a chilling, almost inescapable dimension. Sons often inherited the role, not out of choice or ambition, but out of necessity and a cruel twist of fate. Imagine the young boy growing up in the isolated dwelling on the outskirts of town, watching his father prepare the axe, or listening to the hushed conversations about the upcoming duty. From a tender age, they would be acutely aware of their family's unique, often reviled place in the community. As they matured, the realization would slowly dawn. Few outsiders would ever willingly accept such a position. The stigma was too great, the duties too grim. This meant that if the family wanted to maintain its income and place in the municipal structure, the son was often the only viable successor. There was rarely a formal apprenticeship in the way one might learn carpentry. Instead, it was a grim, unspoken understanding, a gradual immersion into the macabre craft. The son would learn by observation, by assisting with the less gruesome tasks, and eventually, by performing the grim duties himself. This hereditary aspect was a defining characteristic of the executioner's profession, a perpetuation of the burden across generations, ensuring that the stain of blood remained a constant feature of their lineage. It was a life determined not by personal aspiration, but by the relentless dictates of an unforgiving society. The profound social isolation extended deeply into the most fundamental human need, companionship and family. For executioner families, marriage outside their own grim circle was almost unthinkable. Imagine the whispers, the averted gazes, the outright rejection that any member of an executioner's family would face if they dared to seek a partner from respectable society. The pervasive belief that their touch, their very presence was contaminating meant that few, if any, would risk such an association. This enforced endogamy, the practice of marrying only within a specific group, was a defining characteristic of their kinship. Executioner families often married only among themselves, creating a closed, insular community bound by their shared, dreaded profession. Imagine the limited pool of potential partners, the necessity of seeking out other families who bore the same stigma, perhaps even traveling to distant towns to find a suitable match. This created a strange, almost nomadic network of executioner families, intermarrying and sharing a common, unenviable heritage. While this provided a degree of shared understanding and perhaps even solace among those who truly understood their burden, it also further cemented their isolation from the broader society. It was a life of inherent paradox, dependent on society for their livelihood, yet utterly separated from its social fabric. The choice of a partner was not one of affection and free will, but often of grim necessity, dictated by the overwhelming weight of their inherited profession. Perhaps the most heartbreaking consequence of this inherited stigma fell upon the children of executioners. Imagine the innocence of childhood slowly being eroded by the harsh realities of their family's profession. From the moment they could understand, they would be marked for life. At school, if they were even permitted to attend, they would be shunned by their peers, excluded from games and subjected to cruel taunts. Their name, their very presence, carried the weight of their father's grim duties. Imagine the lonely walk home from the village, the silent contempt of other parents, the pointed fingers and whispers. In trade, their prospects were severely limited. Few, if any, master craftsmen would accept an executioner's child as an apprentice, fearing contamination or simply the loss of their own reputation within the guild. This meant that the sons often had no choice but to follow in their father's footsteps, perpetuating the cycle. Daughters, too, faced immense challenges. Their chances of a favorable marriage were almost non-existent outside of other executioner families. Even in church, a place of spiritual solace for many, the executioner's family might find themselves subtly ostracized. Pews might be conspicuously empty around them, and the congregation might avoid direct contact during rites. This pervasive social exclusion meant that the children of executioners were denied the normal experiences of medieval life, forced into a solitary existence defined by the stain of blood that clung to their family name. Their childhood was marked by a constant awareness of their otherness, a silent burden that overshadowed their formative years and rigidly dictated their future. Despite the pervasive stigma, or perhaps because of it, some executioners became legends in their own right. Imagine the chilling tales whispered around the hearth, the dark stories passed down from generation to generation. These famous executioners were remembered in various ways. Some were feared, their names invoked to silence unruly children or to emphasize the severity of the law. Their efficiency in their grim work, their unwavering hand, and their chilling calmness on the scaffold could earn them a grudging respect, a recognition of their unique skill in a macabre craft. Others were quietly forgotten, their names fading into the mists of history, leaving behind only the spectral image of a hooded figure. And in some rare instances, there might have been a grudging admiration for an executioner who was perceived as just, or who perhaps showed a rare moment of mercy. Stories might circulate about a particularly skillful executioner who ensured a quick, clean death, or one who, despite their role, lived a life of quiet piety. These legends, whether born of fear, respect, or quiet memory, underscore the complex and often contradictory place the executioner occupied in the collective consciousness of medieval society. They were not just instruments of the law, they were figures of folklore, symbols of both justice and fear. Their lives, however grim, leaving an indelible mark on the historical imagination. Their very existence, even in memory, served as a powerful reminder of the ultimate authority of the state and the fragility of life. The generational consequences of being an executioner extended beyond social standing to encompass economic realities. While a town might pay handsomely for an executioner, this salary was often tied to the continuation of the family's service. Imagine the pressure on a son to take up the axe, knowing that his family's livelihood depended on it. Refusal could mean destitution, as alternative employment was virtually impossible due to the stigma. This economic coercion further cemented the hereditary nature of the profession, creating a cycle that was incredibly difficult to break. The perks of the job, a designated house, tax exemptions, even a share of the condemned's property, were also inherited, further binding the family to their grim trade. These benefits, while seemingly advantageous, were a Faustian bargain, trading financial stability for social alienation. The family's wealth, however modest, became inextricably linked to the shedding of blood, making it a source of both sustenance and shame. The psychological toll on these families must have been immense. Imagine the internal struggles of a father teaching his son the gruesome intricacies of the trade, knowing he was condemning him to a life of isolation. What conversations took place within the walls of their secluded homes? Did they discuss the morality of their work, or did they develop a hardened stoicism and necessary emotional detachment to survive? The constant exposure to death, the performance of brutal duties, and the pervasive social rejection would have shaped their worldview in profound ways. Did they find solace in their faith, seeking forgiveness for their actions, or did they develop a more cynical outlook on human nature? These unspoken questions linger in the shadows of history, offering a glimpse into the hidden depths of their personal experience. The burden was not just physical or social, it was profoundly psychological, leaving an indelible mark on the minds and spirits of those who bore the executioner's bloodline. The very geography of their lives reinforced this inherited stigma. The executioner's house was often positioned on the very periphery of the town, near the gallows or the common dumping grounds, literally at the boundary between civilized society and the wild, impure spaces beyond. Imagine the physical isolation, a path leading directly to their dwelling, distinct from the well-trodden routes of other citizens. This physical separation mirrored their social distance, a constant visual reminder to the community of their unique and undesirable role. For children growing up in these homes, the sense of being outside must have been palpable, influencing their play, their interactions, and their understanding of their place in the world. Their home was a sanctuary, perhaps, but also a cage, trapping them within the confines of their inherited fate. Even the objects associated with their profession carried the weight of this inheritance. The executioner's tools, the axe, the sword, the ropes, might be passed down from father to son, imbued with the grim history of their past use. Imagine the reverence, or perhaps dread, with which these instruments were handled, knowing the lives they had ended, the stories they silently held. These tools were not just implements of a trade. They were artifacts of a family's history, tangible links to a legacy of death and isolation. Their presence within the family home would be a constant, silent reminder of the inherited burden, a physical manifestation of their unique bloodline. The mark of the executioner extended even to their burial. While formal records are scarce, it is plausible that executioners and their families might have been buried in separate, unconsecrated ground, outside the main churchyard. Imagine the quiet, lonely graves, set apart from the rest of the community, even in death. This final act of separation would underscore the enduring stigma, denying them the common solace of burial alongside their fellow citizens. Even in the eternal sleep, the shadow of their profession might have lingered, a final testament to the profound and enduring consequences of their inherited role. The stories of individual executioners, when they survive, often highlight the internal conflicts and unique lives forged within this marked lineage. Some accounts speak of executioners who were outwardly pious, seeking spiritual redemption for their grim work. Others describe individuals who became hardened and cynical, their souls perhaps calloused by the constant exposure to human suffering. These variations remind us that even within the confines of a severely stigmatized profession, individual humanity persisted, albeit often in distorted or desperate forms. The narrative of the executioner's bloodline is not just one of uniform oppression, but also one of individual adaptation, resilience, and quiet struggle against an overwhelming societal force. As we gently bring this chapter to a close, allow the quiet sorrow of these inherited burdens to settle softly in your mind. The medieval executioner's bloodline was a testament to a harsh societal reality, a continuous cycle of duty, stigma, and profound isolation. It paints a picture of lives constrained by an inescapable fate, yet often lived with remarkable resilience. We now prepare to drift towards the final chapter of our journey, a reflection on how the world changed, how the axe eventually fell silent, and how history ultimately remembers these figures who once stood at the chilling crossroads of justice and death. Let us transition now to the fading echoes of their profession and the quiet memory of a role that, thankfully, has largely vanished from our world. As the final, haunting echoes of the executioner's bloodline gently recede, our quiet historical journey now brings us to the twilight of their grim profession. Imagine, if you will, the slow, almost imperceptible shifting of societal currents, like a vast river gradually changing its course. This chapter invites you to drift into the nuanced history of how the axe, once a terrifying symbol of absolute justice, gradually fell silent, how the executioner's public role diminished, and how, in the vast tapestry of collective memory, their image lingers today, a symbol of both chilling authority and a bygone era. The decline of the executioner's prominence was not a sudden event, but a gradual process intertwined with broader societal shifts, particularly in the understanding of justice and legal reform. As the medieval era gave way to the early modern period, and then into the Enlightenment, there emerged a growing intellectual movement questioning the brutal spectacles that had long defined public punishment. Imagine the quiet deliberations in philosophical salons, the burgeoning ideas of human rights, and the growing discomfort with the overt cruelty of public executions. Thinkers like Cesare Beccaria, with his influential work on Crimes and Punishments, 1764, passionately argued against capital punishment and the barbarity of torture, advocating for more proportionate, humane, and private forms of justice. His ideas, and those of his contemporaries, began to chip away at the long-held belief that public spectacle was the most effective deterrent. The argument gained traction that cruelty did not necessarily prevent crime, and in fact could desensitize the public or even provoke sympathy for the condemned. This changing philosophical landscape created a fertile ground for legal reforms, gradually pushing the grim theatre of the gallows out of the public square and into the shadows. One of the most significant changes was the move towards a more centralized and formalized justice system. In earlier times, punishment could be quite localized, with lords and town councils having considerable autonomy. As nation-states grew stronger and legal codes became more standardized, the ad hoc nature of local executioners began to wane. Imagine a shift from a fragmented system to one that sought consistency and control. This centralization meant that the role of justice was increasingly seen as the domain of the state, not of individual, often stigmatized, contractors. The concept of the rule of law evolved, placing emphasis on due process, evidence, and formalized sentencing, rather than relying on confessions extracted through torture or the moral lesson of a gruesome public display. This evolving legal framework inherently reduced the need for the executioner's traditional, highly visible role. Furthermore, attitudes towards crime and punishment softened over time. While severe penalties remained for many offenses, there was a growing emphasis on imprisonment as a primary form of punishment, rather than immediate corporal or capital retribution. Imagine the construction of new prisons, designed not just to hold, but also, theoretically, to reform. This marked a profound shift from a system primarily focused on retribution and public deterrent to one that incorporated notions of rehabilitation, however nascent, and prolonged incapacitation. As prisons became more common and more sophisticated, the need for constant, visible public executions as the primary means of maintaining order diminished. The gallows became less of a daily threat and more of a final extreme resort. This slow but significant shift in penal philosophy gradually eroded the foundations of the executioner's profession. The 18th and 19th centuries witnessed the most significant decline in the executioner's traditional role, leading to their gradual vanishing from public life, or their transformation into a state-appointed official with a very different public profile. Imagine the disappearance of the hooded, anonymous figure who once strode through medieval towns. As public executions became less frequent and ultimately, in many places, abolished, the executioner as a municipal employee performing diverse, unpleasant tasks faded away. The demand for their services dwindled, and the hereditary nature of the profession, so long a source of both sustenance and stigma, could no longer be sustained. Sons no longer necessarily followed their fathers into the grim trade. They were free, for the first time, to seek other livelihoods, unburdened by the inherited stain. In countries where capital punishment continued, the role of executioner often became a formal, state-appointed position. Imagine a civil servant, perhaps, operating under strict regulations and with a clear, limited mandate. These state executioners were typically fewer in number, highly trained, and their duties were performed in a more private, controlled environment, often within prison walls, far from the public gaze. The shift from public spectacle to private administrative procedure was profound. It removed the theatrical element that had been so central to the medieval executioner's identity. The executioner was no longer a feared public figure, but a functionary, an anonymous cog in the machinery of state justice. This transition marked the true end of the medieval executioner as we have come to understand them, replacing a figure steeped in ritual and local custom with a sterile, bureaucratic role. By the early 20th century, in most Western nations, public executions had largely ceased, and capital punishment itself was either abolished or became extremely rare. Imagine the gradual dismantling of the gallows, the last axes being put away, perhaps relegated to museums or forgotten in dusty municipal archives. The vanishing profession was a testament to changing moral sensibilities, legal advancements, and a growing emphasis on human dignity, even for the condemned. The hangman, once an ever-present, terrifying fixture, became a relic of a past age, a grim reminder of a time when justice was often swift, public, and undeniably brutal. The need for their specific, multifaceted role as torturer, knacker, and public executioner simply ceased to exist, replaced by specialized departments and modern approaches to sanitation, crime investigation, and penal systems. Yet, despite their practical disappearance, the executioner lingers powerfully in folklore, tales, and urban legends, their image enduring as a potent symbol of both justice and fear. Imagine the chilling stories told around campfires, the figures appearing in Gothic novels, or the shadowy characters in historical dramas. The executioner, often depicted with a black hood or a grim, unyielding expression, has become an archetype in the collective consciousness. They represent the ultimate authority, the final arbiter of life and death, embodying the terrifying power of the state. In stories, they are often portrayed as silent, enigmatic figures, their true thoughts and feelings hidden behind a mask of professional detachment. This enduring presence in cultural memory speaks to the profound impact they once had on society, an impact that transcended their physical existence. Their image is often associated with the very instruments they wielded, the gallows standing stark against a stormy sky, the glint of an axe in the moonlight. These symbols, once terrifying realities, have become shorthand for historical brutality and the unyielding nature of punishment. In some local legends, the ghosts of executioners are said to haunt old prison grounds or execution sites, forever bound to the grim deeds they performed. These tales reflect a lingering fascination with figures who occupied such a liminal space between life and death, embodying a necessary evil that society could not escape. The sleepy echoes of the medieval executioner remain today, not as a threat, but as a quiet reminder of a bygone era. Imagine an abandoned gallows, perhaps in a forgotten corner of an old town, now overgrown with ivy and wildflowers, its rough-hewn timber silently weathering the seasons. No longer does it cast a shadow of dread, but rather stands as a historical curiosity, a testament to how far our understanding of justice has evolved. The sounds of the bustling crowd, the solemn pronouncements, the chilling thud of the axe, all have faded into the silent, forgotten echoes under the stars. The executioner's home, once isolated and feared, might now be a quiet cottage, perhaps even a charming ruin, its grim past obscured by the passage of time. This final image invites a moment of quiet contemplation. The absence of the executioner from our modern lives is a measure of progress, a reflection of changing moral landscapes, and a deeper commitment to human dignity. The fear they once inspired has been replaced by the calm, reassuring silence of history. Their story, however grim, is a vital part of understanding the complex, often brutal, tapestry of the past. It serves as a stark contrast to our contemporary justice systems, reminding us of the journey humanity has undertaken in its quest for fairness and compassion. As we conclude this quiet historical journey, allow the gentle images of a forgotten past to settle softly in your mind. The medieval executioner, a figure once feared and reviled, now exists primarily in the realm of memory, a silent testament to a world transformed. The axe has fallen silent, the gallows stands empty, and the chilling rituals have long ceased. All that remains are the whispers of history, guiding you towards a restorative peace, as the echoes of the past softly lull you into a deep and tranquil sleep.